The sky wept, an endless deluge that had transformed the tranquil river into a raging, churning brown surge. It tore at the banks, devouring earth, uprooting ancient trees, and dragging a chaotic stew of debris downstream. The air thrummed with the violence of the water, a primal roar that drowned out all other sounds. Kaelo, a field ranger whose face was etched with the sun and winds of countless patrols, moved along the northern perimeter. His gaze, accustomed to dissecting the subtle language of the bush and the treacherous banks, observing the relentless erosion. Each step was a deliberate placement of weight, testing the sodden ground beneath his heavy boots. Then, amidst the tangle of branches and drowned foliage, he saw it. What first appeared to be another debris-laden log shifted, and a pair of wide, desperate eyes met his. A leopard, half submerged, its once lustrous coat matted and dark, fought a losing battle against the current, its powerful body betraying a profound primal terror. A cold knot tightened in Kaelo's gut. Years of protocol, drilled into him with an unforgiving precision, screamed a clear command: non-interference. Leopards were solitary, elusive, fierce. Apex predators whose very existence was predicated on their wild independence. To interfere with such an animal was not only strictly forbidden, but inherently dangerous. Yet his instinct, deeper and older than any rulebook, clawed at him. To leave it was to sentence it to a slow, certain death by drowning, swept away into the churning unknown. The internal conflict was agonizing, a battle between duty and a raw, unyielding compassion. His jaw tightened, a muscle clenching beneath his weathered skin. "Damn the rules," Kaelo muttered, the words raspy against the din of the river. "I won't watch it drown." And the decision once made settled with a grim resolve. Consequences be damned. He broke into a sprint, boots slapping through the thick, clinging mud, the sound swallowed by the river's thunder. Adrenaline surged, sharpening his focus. He tore at his heavy pack, stripping a thick canvas sling meant for carrying supplies. Reaching a sturdy fever tree, its roots gnarled and deep set, he anchored himself, wrapping the sling around one massive root. Then, without hesitation, he lunged toward the water, extending the other end of the sling. The current fought him, threatening to drag him under, but he pushed through, securing the canvas under the leopard's chest, just as the animal was about to be pulled under. The furious creature thrashed, a guttural snarl ripping from its throat. Razor-sharp claws raked the air, teeth flashed, a blur of primal fury and desperation. But Kaelo held fast, heaving backward with every ounce of strength he possessed. The mud beneath his boots crumbled, threatening to give way, but he pulled again, a raw, wordless grunt escaping his lips. With a final desperate surge, he dragged the leopard onto the bank. Both of them, man and beast, collapsed, shaking uncontrollably, gasping for air, slick with mud and river water. The leopard lay heaving, coughing great gouts of water from its lungs, alive. Kaelo scrambled back, maintaining a cautious, practiced distance, fully expecting the animal to turn on him the moment it recovered. But instead of striking, the leopard lifted its head once, slowly, its eyes blinking as if anchoring itself back to the world. Then, with an almost deliberate grace, it pushed itself to unsteady legs. It didn't snarl. It didn't stalk away. It simply stared directly at Kaelo, an unnerving, intelligent gaze that seemed to pierce through the driving rain. A low, unfamiliar rumble vibrated through the sodden earth, sounding from beyond the ridge that bordered the river. Kaelo froze, his blood chilling. It wasn't thunder. It was deeper, more resonant. Through the curtain of reeds, their fronds bent and broken by the storm, 5 golden-coated lions emerged. A pride. They moved with a silent, terrifying collective intent, their massive forms coalescing from the gray mist of the downpour. Kaelo braced, every fiber of his being anticipating the inevitable, brutal violence between lion and leopard. But the lions didn't attack. One by one, with an almost ceremonial slowness, they sat, their tails flicking in unison, their golden eyes fixed not on the rescued leopard, but on Kaelo himself. This isn't natural," Kaelo whispered, his voice hoarse, his breath catching in his throat. "The impossible has only just begun." The sun, a bruised purple and fiery bronze, began its slow descent, painting the rain-soaked landscape in dramatic fading light. The strange tableau on the riverbank remained unbroken. Kaelo, mud-caked and wary, the trembling, injured leopard, and the five lions, now joined by a sixth, all watching with unnerving stillness. Every nerve in Kaelo's body was a taut wire, braced for the inevitable shift in this impossibly fragile balance. The air itself seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. The lions, golden forms against the darkening reeds, maintained their vigilant, silent vigil. Their focus was not on Kaelo, but singularly on the leopard, an intensity that defied all he knew of predator behavior. There was no territorial snarl, no aggressive posture, only an unsettling collective gaze. Then a lean, scarred lioness, her face a map of past battles, detached herself from the pride. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, each padded paw sinking softly into the wet earth. Kaelo's breath hitched, every instinct screaming at him to prepare for attack. She lowered her head, sniffing the wet grass mere inches from the leopard's side, a scent mark that should have provoked a violent response. But astonishingly, she retreated without aggression, rejoining her pride as silently as she had approached. Kaelo was racked by a fresh wave of internal conflict. His training, years of ingrained reserve protocol, demanded minimal interference. To leave the leopard now, to let nature run its course, would be the professionally correct expected course of action. But after the desperate scramble, the sheer physical effort of saving it, abandoning the animal felt like a profound, unforgivable betrayal. The memory of its terror-stricken eyes in the raging river burned in his mind. "Rules be damned," he muttered, the words barely audible against the lingering rush of the river. His hand, shaking slightly, reached into his pack. He pulled out his canvas ground sheet, his water canteen, and his field kit. "I've started this, I'll finish it." It was an agonizing decision, a conscious choice to break every established boundary, but the alternative felt morally bankrupt. He approached the leopard slowly, cautiously, his movements deliberate. He murmured soft, steady tones, not actual words, but a calming, reassuring presence, a low hum of sound against the vast silence. The leopard, though still trembling, did not bare its teeth. Its eyes, though wary, seemed to hold a flicker of recognition, or perhaps simply exhaustion. With practiced hands, Kaelo cleaned the shallow lacerations on its flanks and foreleg, the wounds inflicted by debris and rocks in the river. He bound them gently with antiseptic-soaked cloth strips. The leopard flinched at first, a low growl rumbling in its chest, but it tolerated his touch. He offered water from a shallow lid, and to his astonishment, the creature drank, long, lapping sips, its tail twitching almost imperceptibly. Throughout this impromptu ministrations, a younger lioness, her eyes gleaming with an almost unnatural luminescence, watched with unmistakable focus. The entire pride seemed suspended in their gaze, silent witnesses. It was as if Kaelo's act of tending the leopard was a ritual they had come to observe, a ceremony whose meaning only they understood. Minutes stretched into an hour. The light faded further, plunging the riverbanks into twilight. Kaelo worked until the leopard lay steadier, its breathing deeper, more regular, its eyes half-lidded in exhaustion. He had done all he could. Then the pride rose as one, a seamless, synchronized movement. Now 6 lions stood, their massive forms silhouetted against the deepening gloom, their tails twitching in a rhythmic, unsettling cadence. They began to move forward, not with the predatory menace Kaelo had braced for, but with the calm of ritual, encircling the man and the leopard. Kaelo's pulse thundered in his ears, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. He felt it in the marrow of his bones. This was no ordinary gathering. Something ancient, a forgotten understanding, was unfolding here, a spectacle unseen for generations. He felt the primal weight of dozens of eyes upon him, the profound gravity of judges at a tribunal, all focused with chilling intensity. The oldest lioness, her muzzle dusted with the white of age, remained standing, slightly apart from the others. Her eyes, fixed on Kaelo, were unblinking, unreadable, as if measuring him, weighing his worth. "What do you want from me?" Kaelo whispered into the heavy charged silence, though he knew deep down that words were meaningless here, that whatever this was, it transcended human language. A deep, resonant hum, not a growl, but a sound that seemed to rise from the very earth, emanated from the old lioness. It rippled through the entire pride, a unified frequency that vibrated in Kaelo's chest as if the pride itself spoke in one voice. It was a sound of immense age and power, a declaration without words. The leopard, which had been lying still, its exhaustion profound, flicked its ears. It blinked slowly, then, with a barely perceptible shift, edged closer to Kaelo's boots. Its wet flank brushed lightly against his leg, a gesture so unexpected it stole Kaelo's breath. It was as though he were a sturdy tree to lean on, an anchor in a world turned upside down, a profound, almost agonizing gesture of trust, or perhaps sheer desperation. In that moment, Kaelo felt an unbearable weight of responsibility settle upon him. The truth was stark and undeniable. The leopard, injured and weakened, would not survive this night alone. And the pride, in their unnerving silence and this strange accord, seemed to have laid that responsibility squarely upon him. He was no longer just a ranger. He was a custodian. The decision was agonizing, a direct defiance of every reserve rule, every protocol he had sworn to uphold. Transporting a wild predator, especially a leopard, back to the outpost for care was an unthinkable risk, and the repercussions, if discovered, would be severe. He would almost certainly lose his job, perhaps even face legal action. But looking at the vulnerable creature, feeling its warmth against his boot, the path was clear. He would do it. He rose slowly, cautiously, then crouched, carefully looping the canvas sling beneath the leopard's chest. He moved with the focused precision of a man handling a live flame, acutely aware of the animal's proximity, its sharp claws and teeth still a threat, despite its current state. Then the phenomenon. The lions parted. Not a sound, not a hiss, not a challenge. The encircling ring simply opened, creating a path. Kaelo felt the primal weight of dozens of eyes following his every labored step as he began to drag the exhausted leopard across the wet ground. His boots dug deep into the slick mud with each shuffle, his shoulders burning with the exertion. The silence of the pride was heavier than any roar, a profound, expectant quiet. By the time he reached the dense reeds where his jeep waited, Kaelo's lungs were on fire, his muscles screaming. He risked a glance back. Against the starlit horizon, barely visible in the deepening gloom, the pride stood, their massive forms still, watching him go. They were witnesses to his departure, to his impossible cargo. As he finally reached the jeep, a new sound erupted. One of the younger lions lifted its muzzle to the sky and let out a roar. It wasn't the sharp territorial thunder Kaelo was familiar with, the warning or the challenge. Instead, it was a drawn-out note that rolled across the flooded plain like a benediction, deep and resonant. Then, one by one, the others joined, their voices layering, blending, until the very air trembled with their collective song. Kaelo felt it in his ribs, in his bones, a profound vibration that spoke of recognition, a mark of something that had irrevocably shifted tonight. I've crossed a threshold, Kaelo thought, the realization settling deep within him. The wild had let him see something no man should. It was a secret, a covenant, an impossible truth. He heaved the half-conscious leopard into the back of the jeep, the exertion draining him completely as the last roar faded into silence, leaving only the sound of his ragged breathing. Back at the reserve outpost, the lights of the main lodge were distant, muted. Kaelo parked his jeep in the deepest shadows, near the veterinary shed. He carefully rigged the canvas sling again, the weight of the limp leopard a profound burden. He hauled it into the shed, its fur still damp and smelling of river water. As he secured the door, the sharp beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, pinning him. "Kaelo, what have you done?" The voice was Yisha's, another ranger, her eyes wide with disbelief and alarm as she took in the scene. Kaelo, mud-soaked and disheveled, standing over a large anesthetized leopard on the examination table. Kaelo's voice, though weary, hardened with resolve. "I wasn't going to let it die." As if in answer, a distant sound drifted in through the night air, penetrating the thin walls of the shed, the low, resonant roar of many lions. The pride was not finished. Inside the veterinary shed, the harsh electric light starkly illuminated the leopard's raw fragility. Kaelo, his hands moving with practiced care, cleaned its wounds, sutured the deeper gashes that had bled profusely, and meticulously set up an IV line to rehydrate the exhausted animal. Aisha watched him, a silent specter, her initial shock giving way to a bewildered acceptance of the impossible scene before them. Hours crawled by. The leopard stirred, a low rumble emanating from its chest. Its amber eyes, no longer dulled by the near drowning, blinked open, locking with Kaelo's. In that gaze, Kaelo saw it. Gratitude, recognition, an intelligence that pinned him more effectively than any claw ever could. It was an unspoken understanding, a silent acknowledgement of life owed and given. Outside, the distant roars from the ridge intensified, echoing across the plains, each booming call seeming to urge the leopard. Aisha, leaning closer, whispered, "It hears them. It wants to answer." The leopard's ears twitched, its tail gave a weak flick. Compelled by the sheer weight of the moment, Kaelo found himself revealing the impossible truth to Aisha. "I pulled it from the river, and then the pride appeared. 6 lions. They didn't strike. They just circled us, like a vow." He recounted the strange silent ceremony, the bizarre lack of aggression. Aisha was stunned, her face a mask of disbelief, but the leopard's undeniable urgency, coupled with the insistent, echoing roars, spoke volumes. Kaelo finally released his restraining grip. The leopard rose unsteadily, its powerful muscles still wobbly, but its gaze fixed on the shed door. Kaelo opened the door, and the leopard limped forward, its movements slow but determined, guided by an invisible thread only it could perceive. Kaelo and Aisha followed at a respectful distance, stepping out into the cool night air. On a rise overlooking the river's dark gleam, the pride waited, massive silhouettes against the faint starlight. As the leopard approached, the old lioness, the matriarch, lowered her head in a gesture of profound acknowledgement. The leopard, in turn, bowed its head, a silent, ancient ritual unfolding before Kaelo's disbelieving eyes. Then the phenomenon repeated itself. The pride shifted, their golden forms melting apart, opening a passage. The leopard stepped through, slow but graceful, into their midst. It was escorted, not hunted, by the pride itself. They merged, a unified entity, and began to move silently towards the shimmering river. "The wild just bent its own rules," Aisha whispered, her voice barely audible, laced with awe and a touch of fear. Kaelo stood rooted, left with an untold covenant, a memory edged in rain and roar that would forever haunt his waking thoughts. Days later, the extraordinary encounter still played in Kaelo's mind. He returned to the original rescue site along the riverbank, drawn by an inexplicable urge. While scanning the ground for any lingering tracks or signs, something caught his eye. Embedded in the churned mud, near where the leopard had been found, were small, glinting metallic shards. They looked artificial, undeniably out of place in the pristine wilderness. He also noticed a faint, unnatural discoloration in the soil, like a chemical residue. "Strange," he mumbled, pocketing a shard. He dismissed it as an isolated incident, perhaps minor industrial waste washed downstream from some forgotten source. On the 4th evening after the rescue, the summons came again, a low, ceremonial roar that shook the very foundations of the camp, calling Kaelo with an undeniable primal force. He left under the guise of a late patrol, his jeep crunching gravel as he pulled away. Aisha watched him go from the shadows of her hut, knowing he was defying camp rules, driven by an irresistible, primal force. He had seen too much to turn back. He found the pride in the now stronger leopard waiting for him, bathed in the tumultuous fury of a raging storm. Their coats were slicked dark with rain, their eyes glowing with an unnerving luminescence in the flashes of lightning that ripped across the sky. The leopard stepped forward through the sheets of rain, approaching Kaelo. It pressed its shoulder against his side, a profound, unshakable act of connection, an affirmation of their shared bond. Kaelo knelt in the mud, chosen to witness. As the storm howled around them, the pride in the leopard turned, melting into the swirling darkness, vanishing as one. Whatever bond had been forged, it was not finished. If you're captivated by this story, make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button to stay updated on this shocking and dangerous conspiracy. Now let's continue with Kaelo's perilous journey into the heart of the wild secret. Kaelo was haunted. Sleep offered no escape, only fragmented images of golden eyes and a leopard's trust. Every rustle of grass outside his hut, every distant roar echoing from the western ridges, pulled his eyes towards the unseen, drawing him further into the uncanny events that had unfolded by the river. The metallic shards he'd pocketed in the strange soil discoloration, dismissed initially as minor incidents, now gnawed at his mind. They simply didn't fit the natural explanation for the leopard's initial distress. The pieces of an unsettling puzzle were beginning to surface. Driven by a growing unease and a profound sense of unnatural disturbance, he returned to the area of the initial rescue and the pride's recurring gatherings. This time his search was meticulous, driven by a new focused intensity. He wasn't looking for tracks, he was searching for anomalies. And he found one. Near where the pride often gathered, partially buried in the mud and almost perfectly camouflaged against the bark of a twisted acacia tree, was an unusual device. It was clearly not park equipment, too sleek, too advanced, completely foreign. He carefully extracted the unit. It was a sophisticated tracking or listening device, designed for covert operation. Its small, complex components speaking of significant resources. Someone's watching them, Kaelo whispered, a cold dread washing over him, and not for conservation. The implication was terrifying. His heightened senses, now attuned to the presence of the unnatural, picked up other subtle signs. Disturbed earth in patterns that weren't animal tracks, faint, unfamiliar boot prints beyond the ranger's usual patrol routes, leading not into the wilderness, but towards a restricted zone on the park's periphery. He knew he couldn't carry this burden alone. That evening, he confided in Aisha, laying out the device and his evidence on the dusty table of her hut. "This is not right, this is organized. Someone is doing something here." His voice was low, urgent, laced with the gravity of his discovery. Aisha, initially skeptical of his wild claims, picked up the device, turning it over in her hands. Her eyes widened as she examined its foreign components. She had also noted the increasingly agitated behavior of other animals in the region, a restless energy that hinted at something deeper than environmental stress. Then a memory surfaced, vague whispers among the local elders, tales of outsiders scouting for rare resources near the boundary, shadowy figures that moved with unnatural stealth. The pieces clicked into place. The pride's calls, which had grown more frequent since the leopard's rescue, now became even more urgent, more insistent. They seemed to be directing Kaelo. They appeared not just to acknowledge him, but to actively lead him on specific paths, pausing and looking back as if urging him to follow, their golden eyes shining with unspoken purpose. They guided him past areas with stunted vegetation, where the bird life was unusually quiet, an eerie silence replacing the usual symphony of the bush. They led him to a partially hidden, dried-up waterhole, a place he knew should have been teeming with life. There they stopped, turning their heads, looking back at him, their gazes drawing his attention to the unnatural changes. The parched earth, the dying plants, the absence of life. It was a desolate testament to an unseen force. Kaelo interpreted their calls and their deliberate guidance as a profound, undeniable warning. It was a plea for help against an unseen human threat that was systematically damaging their home, their very existence. The conflict within him was immense, a visceral struggle. Investigating this, pushing deeper into this nascent conspiracy, could cost him everything. His career, his freedom, even his life. But ignoring the pride's intelligent, urgent warning now felt like a profound betrayal of their trust, a desecration of the sacred bond they had forged. "They're showing me something, Aisha," Kaelo stated, his voice low and firm, his resolve solidifying. "Something dangerous that threatens us all." The bond with the animals, once a fragile understanding, had deepened into a shared, unspoken purpose, forging an unlikely alliance against a brewing, hidden crisis. Kaelo knew with a chilling certainty that he could no longer turn back. The truth was too important to be ignored. He had seen too much, been shown too much, to pretend ignorance. Following the pride's silent, urgent lead, Kaelo and Aisha trekked deeper into a seldom patrolled, rugged region, their boots sinking into the wet earth. The air, which usually hummed with the symphony of the bush, grew heavy and still, an unnatural quiet descending upon them. The familiar scent of damp earth and verdant foliage was gradually replaced by a faint, insidious chemical smell, metallic and acrid. With every step, the vegetation became sparser and sickly, dying in patches, the vibrant greens fading to a sickly yellow-brown. The pride moved with an almost military precision, their massive forms flanking Kaelo and Aisha, guiding them unerringly through the deepening twilight. They were led to a hidden clearing, almost completely shrouded by a dense, ancient canopy of trees that had survived the surrounding blight. What they discovered there stole Kaelo's breath and twisted Aisha's stomach. It was a clandestine operation, a small, camouflaged drilling site or research outpost, nestled deep in the heart of the reserve. It was clearly not sanctioned by the reserve authorities. Discarded equipment lay haphazardly, barrels of unknown, labeled substances sat half buried in the mud, and unusual biological markers stained the nearby rock formations. It all pointed to unethical corporate or governmental activity, illegal resource extraction, covert bioexperimentation, or perhaps toxic waste dumping. "It's a cover-up," Aisha gasped, her eyes wide with horror and disbelief. The whispered elder's tales suddenly terrifyingly real. "They're poisoning the land, maybe even the animals." Then the leopard emerged from the pride, its stride now strong and purposeful. It walked towards a small, stagnant water source that reeked faintly of chemicals, a putrid mockery of what should have been life-giving. The leopard turned, its intelligent gaze locking with Kaelo's, a silent, searing accusation. It was showing him the source of its near death, the poison permeating its home. At that moment, the pride let out a collective, thundering roar. It wasn't a challenge or a greeting, but a fierce, unified declaration, echoing through the hidden valley, a primal warning to the human intruders who dared desecrate their sanctuary. Suddenly, armed figures emerged from the makeshift outpost, security personnel in unmarked uniforms, not rangers, their faces grim and unyielding. Kaelo's blood ran cold. They had been watched, monitored, lured into a trap. One of the figures, a stern man in a crisp corporate uniform, stepped forward, a cold, calculating glint in his eye. "You've gone where you don't belong, Ranger. This is classified." His tone left no room for doubt. Kaelo stood his ground, a defiant figure shielded by the pride. "This land belongs to no one corporation. And these animals, they've shown me your truth." As if in response, the pride moved closer, their massive bodies forming a protective, living barrier between Kaelo, Aisha, and the armed men. Their eyes, glowing with a fierce, undeniable intelligence, were fixed on the intruders. The men hesitated, their professional training momentarily overridden by the sheer, impossible spectacle of an apex predator, pride defending a human. They were confronted by an alliance that defied all logic, all nature. In that chilling standoff, Kaelo understood with bone-deep clarity the full extent of the animal's actions. The unprecedented gratitude he had witnessed wasn't just for saving the leopard, it was for his willingness to break protocol and confront a deeper, more insidious threat. The animals were using him, using Aisha, as witnesses, as emissaries for the wild itself, entrusting them with a truth too vast for human understanding. The armed men, unnerved by the sheer power and intelligent cohesion of the pride's defense, slowly, reluctantly, began to back away, their weapons still aimed, but their resolve visibly shaken. Kaelo and Aisha retreated, but not in defeat. They carried with them chilling, irrefutable proof of a corporate, perhaps governmental conspiracy. More profoundly, they carried a dangerous understanding. The wild had chosen its champions, and they now held a secret that could expose a powerful, corrupt conspiracy, forever changing their perception of the world and their place within it. They had become guardians of an ancient trust, tasked with a truth that could shake humanity to its core. From the moment Kaelo, a seasoned ranger, defied every protocol to pull a leopard from the swollen, roaring surge of the river, an impossible chain of events was set in motion. The lion pride's initial, unbelievable silence quickly transformed into an ancient covenant, drawing Kaelo into a world where the wild communicated not through roars of aggression, but through profound, intelligent calls and guiding gazes. What began as an act of compassion for a single animal swiftly unraveled into a revelation of unseen forces and a shocking corporate conspiracy poisoning the land. Guided by the animals, Kaelo and Aisha discovered a hidden site, a stark testament to humanity's greed, threatening the very heart of the reserve. The confrontation with armed, unmarked security personnel solidified their terrifying realization. The animals weren't just showing gratitude, they were choosing champions, using Kaelo as an emissary to expose a truth too dangerous for any man to ignore alone. Shielded by the primal power of the pride, Kaelo and Aisha retreated, forever bound to a secret that transcended human understanding, carrying the weighty burden of the wild's desperate plea. Their world, once familiar, was irrevocably altered, their perception of nature forever shifted by the intelligence and trust of the animals.